Hello, everybody. We're back. We're going to be talking about functions. And let me just tell you the most important function that you have is your if statement. So if I'm going to have something like this, I have if a person sells over $100, they make 7.5%. Otherwise, they make 5% commission. So this sales is 102. So how do I express their commission? If D5 is greater than 100, comma D5 times 7.5%, comma D5 times 5.5%. This first section over here is the logical test. What that means is that's the test that we're doing to see was this true or false. If this is true that D5 is greater than 100 because they did sell more than 100, then we're going to say take that number and multiply by 7.5%, and that is their commission. Because if they multiply, if they made over 7.5, if they made over 100, they get 7.5% commission. And if not, this is the section to say that if it's false. And if not, you would say D5 times 5%. Now, what about if we were to say something like this? You were going to get a 78 on a test or something like that. And I wanted to make this into an if statement. So we can make this if statement pretty sophisticated. We can say something like if this cell equals A, notice that I put it in quotations because, I'm sorry, if this cell is, let's say it this way, if the cell is greater than 80, if this cell is, let's say, greater than 90, then we're going to say the truth. If that's true, then you get an A. If that cell is greater than 90, then you get an A. We could even say greater than or equal to, and notice that the 90 is not in quotations because that is a number, while the A is in quotations because that is a string. Now, what about if you didn't get over a 90? Well, I'm going to put another if statement in here. I'm going to say if this cell is greater than an 80, greater than or equal to an 80, notice that I've already used the case when it's greater than 90, so I don't have to worry about that. So now I only have the case if it's greater than 80, and because if it was greater than 90, then it's done. It finished already. But if not, you keep going. So if it's not, check if it's greater than 80. And if it is, I'm going to say B. Notice it's in quotations. And what about if that's not true? Then I'm going to say I could do more if statements, or I could just do C. So you only get an A, B, or C, but you have to be careful over here. Notice that I have two if statements. One's nested inside the other. And what that means is that you also have to be very careful about your parentheses over here. So you can see that it says 78. Now, what if I had a 86 over here? It says B. And what if I had a 91 over here? It says A. So this function over here does exactly what I want. This is to do what if it's true, then do A. And if not, check if this is true. And if it is, do B. And if not, do C. Now, we could make more if statements inside here as well. Now, one thing that's very confusing for people is to say and, or, and not inside an if statement. These are three logical tests that we can use. Let's just color this in so we recognize them. Those are three logical tests that we can use and to do if there's two conditions. So let's say that we have something that not only do you need to, let's say that we have two conditions. For instance, it needs to be raining and you need to have more than $50 in your account, right? If something special happens, you get a special ice cream if it's raining and you have more than $50 in your account. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, but those are my two conditions. Now, if I want to do the and, I'm going to say if two conditions have to be true. Make sure you put your equal sign in front of your formulas always. If, and I'm going to say this cell equals rain, right? It has to be raining, comma. Now, how do I say and? Well, what we do is we use this as a function, and it's pretty tricky. You say and you put that on the outside. And then we said this cell has to be greater than 50. So those are our two conditions. So that is our logical test. If both of those are true, that will return true. If one of those is false, it's going to return false. So if and, it says rain and 15 is greater than 50, then you get ice cream. And if not, now one interesting thing is I don't have to put the case if not. Now I'm not going to list the last condition. I could say something like maybe it's blank. Those are just two quotations together. That's one possibility. I could call it 0, or I could say it's false, right? There's a lot of possibilities, or I could really just leave it blank and let's see what happens. So right now it's greater, but what if this was actually 45? What happens? It says false, because even though I didn't specify what is the condition, I didn't specify what it should do if these two conditions are not met. But guess what? Even if you don't specify it, it says false. Now, that one is going to be false because that's just what I had as the output. I'm going to do another condition. I'm going to say or. As long as one of these, if this one is rain, that's the first condition. That could be true. Or if this one is greater than 50, only one of them has to be true because I used an or. So an or says only one of them has to be true. So this is just another case. And if not, I'm going to do that. So you can see it says ice cream because at least one of them is true, right? And the not just switches the true to false. I'm not going to do that, but that's the idea over there. So this is quite tricky to, one, have nested ifs, right? And two, to have logical operators and or not inside your if statements. But those are two very, very important things. In functions, those are the most important things to know. Okay, now if you want to highlight a whole column, you can do B:B. I threw that in just as something to know and when you're doing with functions. You can also do functions inside functions like we saw. So you can have radians and then sine of that. You can do degrees and then sine of that. Now you don't need to know the math. I'm just showing you that there's one function can be nested inside another function. There are functions that have no arguments. Pi is a function that has no arguments. It's a special function that just tells you the value of pi. Some other functions that have no arguments, the now function. There are nothing to put in here. There's no arguments to put in there. Well, that now tells you what time it is and what the date is, and that's what I'm doing this right now. Today, it tells you today, right? There aren't, rand is another function that gives you a value between 0 and 1. A random number between 0 and 1. Those are all functions that do not have parameters. If I wanted to, do not have values for those parameters. If I wanted to give you an example, ooh, look what happened. I tried putting 1, 2, 3 in there and I got this. This is a perfect example of what could go wrong. Now, what's wrong? The reason is because it's not viewing that as a number, it's viewing it as a date. So I wanted to put in numbers, so I have to go to my home tab and then I can go to this drop-down box and I can change the format of this. This is a great example. I can change the format of this and now I have the numbers. If I wanted to change it with dollar signs, I could do that. If I wanted to change it as a percentage or something else, I could do that. If I wanted to increase the decimal or decrease the decimal, I could do that. But you saw that I put something in, it changed the format and I had to change it back and I had to recognize what that is. I'm going to actually change these into numbers and I'm going to get rid of the decimals because I don't want to see them. Now, what I was talking about, just to explain what it means to have an argument in here, this can have as many arguments as you like because it can fit in multiple arguments. It says H2 to H12 to H14. That is an argument in there. Okay, so that's what we mean by saying arguments. So let me just skip over to here, which is that this is a number that has no arguments. This can have, max can have arguments, right? It's the max of these numbers. That's a nice function. Large is similar to max, except you get to tell me which largest one you want. You want, in this case, the second largest. If you wanted the third largest or the fifth largest or whatever it might be, you could specify that too. Over here, I have the average of these. Those are all functions that are taking values. Large actually has two components to it. Square root is a function that just takes in a number and it spits something out, and you can look at fancy things too by getting d to the cube plus d12 to the cube, and then you take the square root of it or something like that. But you can use functions and you can put in mathematical values inside those functions. Now, this is a very strange function because this function says it has the squiggly lines, and I told you that that means that it's a unit, that we think of it as all together one big unit. So what is this doing? This says if D12, which is this number, 3.14, equals 1, 2, 3. What does that mean? Because it has those squiggly lines, and you have to press Control-Shift-Enter when you do this because they're thinking of it as one unit, right? Not just a group and you're just doing it, but it's a whole unit. You say 1, 2, 3, that actually will give you a true if it is 1, 2, or 3, and false otherwise. So in this case, it's false, but if I were to change this to a 2, then it says true over here because that is the one of those is true. In other words, that's what the formula says, is D12 1, 2, or 3, right? So as a unit, you can do this, and you can even put those crazy things in there. Now, if you want some practice, this is some good practice. You can look at this to fill in those other columns over there. Using large and max and if and other things like that and what to do. So this is very good practice. I'm going to jump now to, and so there we go with functions, okay? So I'll leave that for you to do as an exercise.